Hey, what's going on, guys? Realm Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we are doing another Mythic Plus healer tier list for Season 1 of The War Within. I have been noticing lately on YouTube, a lot of other people are using this Archon GG tier list, very similar to myself. So we are using Archon GG, so this is just going to take Raider.io data and compile it into a tier list. We're looking at the 7 to 15 key range right now to try to capture a more broad player base. Last time we looked at this, there was only like a couple thousand parses, and now we have almost a million parses worth of data to look at here. So this should give a better representation of which healers are strong at the moment. I have noticed a lot of other YouTubers are using this tier list as well, so I guess they've kind of caught on to our tier list type of videos. So you're probably going to be seeing a whole bunch of other YouTubers who are using Archon GG as well. I started using it for the first time, and I think my first tier list video was 3 or 4 months ago, but yeah, it looks like everybody's sort of using this tier list right now, and I'm pretty sure I was one of the first ones to start using this, so pretty cool to be able to see that we're able to sort of shift the meta of tier list, I guess. At least that's what I like to think. Maybe not. Maybe people have been using this for a long time, and I caught on late, but I'm pretty sure I was one of the first people to start using this Archon GG website here. So anyways, just sort of starting with the top down of the tier list. Let's start in S tier with Restoration Shaman. So Resto Shaman is in S tier still. It's at the top of S tier. Pretty much has been this entire season. We did see some slight nerfs to Earth Shield. So now it only reduces damage by 3% rather than 5%. And then there's also a 20% nerf to Acid Rain's damage. So Resto Shaman has really good spot healing with Riptide and the Farseer build. They've got awesome utility with totems. We bring Lust. Have a good overall damage profile, so no complaints about Resto Shaman at the moment. They're also really good with just sort of the dispel profile of the season. We're seeing a ton of poisons in season 1. Then not only that, the Devour affix that pops up, you can cleanse it with poison cleansing totems. So very OP at the moment. It just basically has made the Devour affix just a non-affix, you know, and any sort of shaman spec that you bring into your group can spec into poison cleanse totems. So this previous week has pretty much just been bring a shaman, and it really just does better than all of the other healers. I mean, it's just better than all the healers in all the different ways, just across the board from a utility standpoint. Very close on an HPS standpoint, and then kind of in the middle of the pack on DPS, to be honest. So if we just kind of come in here and sort by DPS, you got to see they're top 3. So just either they're the best at a specific thing, or they're top 2 or 3 in pretty much every single category. So no surprises here, seeing this in S tier still. One thing that has been actually pretty surprising though is Discipline Priest has moved up into S tier. So in our last video, Discipline Priest was bottom C tier. So it has moved all the way from the bottom of our list to the top of S tier. So why did this happen? Well, number one, we did see some big atonement buffs recently, a few weeks ago, to Discipline Priest. So that's really helped the spec out. I think it was something like a 30% buff. They also have just in general really good healing cooldowns. You know, you have to use them in sort of specific orders. So like you can Rapture in between your Mindbender windows to kind of buy you some time until Mindbender comes back up. Then, you know, like if Rapture is on cooldown, you can rely on like your Halo, your Power Word Shield, or even like your Surge of Light procs. So it's going to be really good for like predictable damage patterns. And in really high keys, people normally don't stand in swirlies. They normally don't stand in the things that they're not supposed to be standing in. So it's easier to predict the damage. This is normally why I say that Discipline Priest isn't a great pug healer, is because the more and more you pug, the more and more random the damage patterns become. And then you can't really predict your healing windows quite as effectively. So you really have to be able to pair those atonement and those void wraith windows with boss and mob damage patterns. And if you don't, it can just really throw off your entire sort of healing rotation. Disc Priest has also been really good this past week with the Devour affix with Mass Dispel. And just overall, it just brings an insane amount of damage to your group. So not only, you know, does it bring good damage through disc itself, but it also brings power infusion to the group. This is typically why in very high-end Mythic Plus environments from season to season, we always see a priest in some fashion or form. It's due to power infusion. So very potent healer if you can kind of work around those damage patterns and really be able to predict that damage before it happens. Up next, we have Preservation Evoker in A tier. So Preservation Evoker is very interesting because in our last video, it was bottom C tier as well. So we've seen two huge moves between Disc Priest and Preservation Evoker. I think one of the issues with Preservation Evoker is that it does compete with Augmentation Evoker. So, you know, sometimes you have a lot of the good players playing Augmentation instead of Prez. So I do think that that's one of the reasons that Prez Evoker does struggle a little bit, is because it's just competing with Augmentation Evoker. And you're never going to bring, you know, two Evokers to a high-end group, right? Now, one thing I will say about Preservation Evoker is I do think that we will see it kind of creep up as the season goes on, and that's just due to how their healing profile works. So I think that Preservation Evoker becomes better and better as damage sort of scales up relative to health pools. The reason I think this is because they have a lot of spells like Reversion and Rewind that will heal for a percentage of damage taken rather than just a flat amount. So it will be interesting, you know, just kind of looking really quick at Raider.io leaderboards, you can kind of see that, you know, most people are running Augmentation Evoker. So Preservation Evoker is going to have to unfortunately compete with that spot. So the first Preservation Evoker that we do see is actually in spot 119, and you can see, you know, they're not running Augmentation Evoker, and it's actually a very surprising group because they're also not running a Priest for PIs. So, you know, very interesting. We'll just have to see what happens with it as the season kind of goes on. Up next, we have Holy Paladin. So Holy Pally did sort of dodge that flat healing percent nerf that was coming to them. I think that was this week's reset, October 8th. So not only did they dodge that nerf, but they also got some buffs to Dawnlight, 30% increase, which is very nice. So it looks like at the moment it is high B tier. Last time we took a look at this, it was bottom C tier. So it looks like it did move up quite a bit. I think the main problem with Holy Paladin just at the moment is that I just feel like its single target healing and its spenders don't feel great still. I think that they feel better than they did in Dragonflight, but I still don't think it's quite there in terms of like spot healing. So their utility, their externals, you know, those are awesome. They have great cooldowns, but on my Holy Paladin, I really have issues like topping off the tank, for example. I don't think Holy Shock and Word of Glory are really tuned properly to be able to top off a tank. I think that they could top off a DPS just fine, but a tank is a completely different story. I find myself a lot of the times kind of relying on Holy Light to be able to do some single target healing, like a lot of single target healing to the tank. And it just feels sort of bad and awkward, even with like Infusion of Light procs. It just doesn't feel great to be hard casting a Holy Light. And then not only that, Holy Light is just very mana intensive as well. So I have sort of ran into some mana issues on my Holy Paladin. More mana issues probably on Holy Paladin than any of these other healers combined. Then in addition to all that, I just feel that their damage profile is pretty bad. I don't know, it just feels awkward to have Shield of the Righteous competing with Word of Glory for Holy Power. It's almost like you have to pick between doing damage or doing healing, when in reality, I feel like Holy Paladin should sort of heal through their damage. So what I wish they would do with Holy Paladin is take Shield Righteous and just completely remove the Holy Power portion of it. And, you know, if they want to put it on a short cooldown or whatever, that's fine. But I do think it is awkward to be spending our precious Holy Power on a Shield of the Righteous. It just doesn't feel right. Or, you know, if they do keep it as it is, then I think Shield of the Righteous needs to be, its damage needs to be like 2 or 3x increase. It's just massively undertuned right now, in my opinion. And, you know, most of our damage at the moment is actually coming from our Wings and Blessing of Summer combo. So I just think that there are several things with Holy Paladin that have still, you know, it's seen a ton of changes this season, like all healers have. But I think that Holy Paladin is just something that they don't quite have the dials right on just yet. So I think it needs buff in single target spot healing, which is kind of, you know, their specialty. That's what they've kind of been known for historically. And then they also need some buffs in the damage department. Up next, we have Mistweaver Monk. So if we go back to the previous list, we can see Mistweaver was top of S tier, and it has now fallen to middle B tier. Now, one thing you might be noticing, and something that I've even noticed myself, is that the Mistweaver Monk IO score actually dropped, and that's because we were using the high keys filter in this snippet. I'm not sure if I have another look at it. Now, it looks like we filtered by high keys, so that's why we're seeing the IO drop. If we filter by high keys, you can see the IO actually goes up. So these comparisons aren't really one-to-one. I apologize, I didn't have the filter set correctly there, but Mistweaver Monk, regardless of which filter you use, has moved down to B tier. And I think one of the reasons we've seen this is because Mistweaver Monk doesn't bring the group utility that a lot of these other specs actually bring. I think their raw HPS numbers are fine. I think that they can handle dispels, the poison dispels just fine, the devour affix just fine. I think their main struggle is going to be just in the utility that they bring. You know, how do we compete with power infusion? How do we compete with lust? How do we compete with all the utility that Holy Paladin brings, right? So I don't feel that Mistweaver Monk is a bad healer at the moment. I think in terms of HPS, it can keep up and keep the group alive. I just think there's better options for really pushing timers than Mistweaver Monk. So from a completion standpoint, I think Mistweaver's fine. It's just a timing the dungeon standpoint where I think Mistweaver kind of falls off. Now, with that being said, I do think Mistweaver should have a slight buff to their damage profile. You know, Mistweaver is one of those healer specs that heals through their damage. So seeing them so low on this graph is a little concerning. You know, Disc Priest heals through their damage. Why are they so high compared to us? I know there's the argument for power infusion. But I do think that Mistweaver Monk should probably be above Preservation Evoker and Resto Shaman in the number 2 spot. Very similar argument that I had with Holy Paladin. They kind of heal through their damage. So I think we should always see like Disc Priest, Mistweaver, and Holy Paladin be the top 3 in the damage department. But yeah, overall, Mistweaver, I'm not seeing any sort of major issues. Just a buff to the damage profile would be nice. And, you know, of course, if they could give us some group utility like a Lust or a B-Res or something like a Power Infusion. You know, we're the only healer on this list that doesn't have like a major group utility. We do have Mystic Touch. That's very comp specific. I've talked about that many times on this channel. If you just go through the list, right? Lust, PI, B-Res, PI. You know, we don't have anything that competes with any of that. So it would be nice to, I'll stop ranting now, but it would be nice to see some additional utility for Mistweaver. Up next, we have Restoration Druid, and they have been buffed yet again. I think this is like their 3rd or 4th patch in a row where Restoration Druid has been buffed. So this is one of those healer specs that back in the beta, we got a ton of feedback on. Everybody was talking about how Resto Druid feels weak. It was just kind of ignored. And sure enough, we see 3 or 4 patches in a row where we're getting buffs for Restoration Druid. Still, doesn't really solve any core issues with Resto Druid, but just buffing it. I think that's kind of a lazy take on Blizzard's part, just buffing the flat health percentage. What they need is sort of like a restructure either in their talent tree. I've seen this talked about a whole bunch, how photosynthesis shares a node with Flourish. That needs to be restructured completely. And overall, Restoration Druid just needs more cooldowns. So if we go back and we look at last week, it was kind of middle B tier, but it has fallen a bit to bottom B tier. And even with those buffs, you know, still very low in the HPS department. Still the lowest DPS healer of all of them. Very low popularity and hierarchies as well. So just overall, Resto Druid just got some issues. I think if you do want to play Restoration Druid, I think that you need to play around your Convoke windows very carefully and your Reforestation procs through Swiftmen. That's really your only source of sort of digging yourself out of a bad situation. Their cooldown department is just not very good at the moment. You just have a couple spells that you can really rely on. And I think that's the main problem with Resto Druid is just their cooldowns. I feel like their general rotation is okay where you're applying hots to buff your regrowth through your mastery. I don't really mind it. I know a lot of people would rather have a more hot-focused playstyle. I kind of like playing around regrowth because I can kind of funnel my healing into specific targets a little bit better. But, you know, I just feel like I'd like to have another button or 2 to press to get me out of a bad situation. All right, then finally at the very bottom here, we have Holy Priest. So if we go back, they were sort of middle C, and now they are the worst healer in the game at the moment. And that's just according to this list based on Radar data. You might have a different opinion, that's fine. But we haven't seen any changes to Holy Priest pretty much the entirety of the War Within, which is very surprising. Another problem that Holy Priest has is it does compete with Discipline Priest. So all the good Priest players right now are probably playing Discipline Priest, which sort of inflates this number even, or deflates this number even more. I do think that Holy Priest does sort of fall into a similar bucket as Restoration Druid It's just kind of in a weird spot because I'm not really convinced that they have the best cooldowns to deal with burst damage. I do think that Apotheosis and Guardian Spirit are both very strong cooldowns, but I think they need another button or two to press when things start to get a little hairy. I do really like the general core playstyle of Holy Priest with the Lightweaver, right? Going 2 flash heals into 2 heals. But something just sort of feels awkward with Holy Priest whenever I play it. I think it's actually, the cooldown issue would be nice to get fixed to get another cooldown or two, but I think it really lies behind how Premonition works with Oracle. It can just feel awkward to play around it. I just feel like there's too much thinking involved with Premonition in general. So you have to recognize, is this the shield part of Premonition? Is this the CDR part of Premonition? What should I use that CDR on? Should I use it on one of my holy words? Should I use on prayer mending? Oh, this is the one where overhealing is then dispersed upon my party. Should I just spam heal myself and have that healing dispersed to everybody? It just feels, I don't know, there's just too much going on with it. And what I'd rather them do is just take Premonition and just sort of give you like a flat buff to some of your spells. Like, okay, this charge of Premonition buffs flash heal. This charge of Premonition buffs heal. This charge of Premonition just gives you flat healing across all of your spells, just something that's just easier to play around. Then yeah, if we do take a look at Holy Priest in terms of the HPS department, it's bottom of the barrel. Look at the DPS, it's close to bottom of the barrel, right? So a lot of things going against Holy Priest at the moment, especially the fact that it shares its player base with this priest, which might be deflating these numbers just a bit. But I do think that there are some issues with Holy Priest that need to be addressed. All right, guys, that's it for this video. Thank you so much to my patrons, Juan1 and Distinger Jr. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for supporting the channel. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing to the channel. See you on the next one.